Deion Sanders was a captain going into his senior season at Florida State, and it only made sense because Deion was the best defensive player on his team for the past 3 seasons, and the impact that he had on the back end of the defense impacted all 10 guys around him. Linemen were better rushers because of him, and DBs were playing better in coverage. And if Florida State was going to make a run for the national championship his senior season, it was going to be on the back of Deion and the defense. And Florida State had an incredible opportunity in week 2 to see how good they actually were as they took on Alabama. Bama was a top 10 team and had some of the best weapons in the country, but the Florida State defense was making them pay. That forced fumble would turn into a field goal in the first points of the game for Florida State, and eventually they'd be able to put together another drive to go up by 10. Bryce Young and the Alabama offense were trying to get something going in the first half, but they just couldn't string together enough good plays. The Florida State D-line was on his ass like white on rice, and by the second half, Deion started getting in on the fun. On this 3rd and 2, he would go ahead and make the play in the backfield. He said, they some barbecue chicken. And it was crazy to think that this Alabama team couldn't put a single point on the board up against Florida State, and with just a couple minutes left in the game, they would throw it deep, but it would get intercepted. Florida State felt like they had all the pieces to make a run at it this season. After shutting out their last 2 opponents, Florida State was feeling themselves going into this game against Virginia. Deion and company were on a mission on the defensive side of the ball, and they weren't letting Virginia get anything going in the first half. But when the Florida State offense got an opportunity to go up by 2 touchdowns, they would squander it in the red zone and the QB would fumble it. But dog, tell me why Adrian Peterson picked up the fumble for these dudes, because how is this man not going down? By the time the second half rolled around, Florida State would put that second touchdown on the board. And after Florida State's defense gave up 0 points in 11 quarters, Virginia was finally threatening with this beautiful ball. They would finally be the first team to score on Florida State this season, but that's all that they were going to get. Florida State made sure that they made a statement at the end of this game, forcing this fumble and scooping it up and taking it to the crib. It's probably a good thing that Deion decided not to declare early for the draft, because this really might have been a special season. And with the way that everyone around him was playing, including the new starting quarterback, and not to mention the front 7 for Florida State, which was going absolutely nuts. Nick Baker finished this game with 5 sacks and a forced fumble. This is easily one of the wildest plays you're ever going to see. Syracuse was running the speed option and would pitch it right into the hands of Deion Sanders, who would take it all the way for a touchdown. That's really some shit I've only seen in Pop Warner. Like, that is actually nuts. And with that crazy momentum play, Syracuse was already down 14-0 early in the first quarter, and Deion just kept strapping up. This might have been Deion's best game of his career, because even though he didn't have an interception, he didn't let up a single catch all day. But of course, with the highs come the lows, because after Florida State went up 17-0, Maryland had a quick strike, and on the very next possession would throw it deep on Deion's side, and the ball was placed perfectly for the touchdown. Deion was sick at himself, and he said, nah, I gotta turn this shit up, and on this 3rd and 10 blew up the running back. By the 4th quarter, this game was already in hand, but Maryland scored the most points any team had scored on them all season, 14. And I know it's not a lot, but you gotta understand, Florida State trying to do something special this season, and it starts with their defense. So if a 2-2 Maryland team could put up 14 points, they need to tighten up, because there's a lot better teams on their schedule that they're gonna have to play. After Deion Sanders had arguably the best game of his career 2 games ago, he needed to step it up against Miami, because he was getting exposed. This was not the time to play down to your competition, especially against your rival in Miami. But everything that could go wrong really went wrong. Deion played this play perfectly, but somehow the ball got past him. And in the 3rd quarter, this cover 2 look would get exposed by 4 verts, and Deion and the safety were arguing on whose fault that was. I mean, realistically, Deion probably should have carried it more vertical, but that safety got to stay in between 1 and 2. And Florida State couldn't hold Miami at all, because they would score this touchdown in the 4th quarter to really put this game away. And after Deion had one of the worst games of his career against Miami, he would start this game off against NC State with a forced fumble that Florida State would recover. These was the type of plays that Florida State was expecting out of Deion, and thankfully they'd be able to convert them into points. But NC State's a team that had Florida State's number a couple times over the past few years, so they couldn't let up at all. But it seemed like Florida State finally figured it out and turned it around, because they would shut out a pretty good NC State offense. But truthfully, only time can tell. Bro, I swear it is raining every single game at Florida State. I mean, it's a little bit depressing, I'm not gonna lie, especially if you're a player. That's one of the worst feelings in the world. Like, I'd rather snow than rain. But these types of games were to the advantages of the defenses. And Deion says, stop playing with me, little boy. Do not try me again. Florida State would go up by 2 possessions by the second half, and this man Deion was shedding off every block and making every play possible. He was definitely on a mission, and Florida State would finish their 2nd straight game with a shutout. But I'm telling you, you would not believe who they had to play next, because why the hell would they put Georgia on their schedule in the middle of the season? Florida State had already beating Alabama in week 2, but what's the odds of them beating 2 of the most talented teams from the SEC in one season? I'll tell you right now, the odds is very low, especially since Georgia's offense was way more high powered than any other team that they had faced all season. Florida State would do a good job on this possession, holding them to a field goal, but the Florida State offense just was struggling and would fumble it here, and Georgia would recover. Florida State wouldn't get the opportunity to even come close to scoring again, and Georgia would come out with the win. Clemson was another one of those really talented teams that, regardless of what their record said, and Florida State couldn't start this game off any better, but after that interception, the offense would sputter. FSU would have to settle for a field goal, and Clemson was trying to put together a drive of their own before the half. They'd be able to get down inside the 30, but Deion would light their ass up like the 4th of July. By the end of the third quarter, it was just a one-possession game, and Deion had a chance to try and put this game away. Even though he made that big-time hit on 4th and 8, he wouldn't be able to secure this tackle and give the ball back to Florida State's offense, and Clemson took full advantage of the opportunity. They would go ahead and put a touchdown up, tying this game up. It looked like all the momentum was on Clemson's side, especially late in the fourth quarter when their running back would rip this run off on the sideline, and it honestly looked like they were going to win this game in regulation, but the Florida State defense and special teams stepped up, and Deion made this big hit. Clemson would miss the eventual field goal, and we were in overtime, and on 3rd and 2, Florida State would convert, and with 4 plays to try and go and win this game, of course Florida State would throw the interception in the end zone. Clemson didn't even need to take it to the crib. They were just trying to be disrespectful. But I'm gonna be real, if there's one team that Florida State cannot lose to, it is BC. Them boys is terrible. Especially with no Zay Flowers on this BC offense, it was gonna be difficult for them to put any points up on the board. And just as I say that, they gonna throw this perfectly thrown ball over Deion's head for the diving catch. And then the running back gonna turn it up and act like his name Derrick Henry. He would run through the entire defense for the touchdown. And why the hell was Deion playing patty cake with this dude 50 yards away from the ball? Florida State had a little bit of a scare against this sorry ass BC team, but Deion and company put it together at the end of the game. And the final regular season game of the year was the big one, rivalry week against Florida. This will be Florida State's 3rd SEC opponent this year. Even though it was clear Florida State wasn't going to be in any major bowl games and lost their opportunity to play for the national championship much earlier in the season, if they could have a winning record against SEC teams, that would be a mini victory, and Deion was going to set it off with this sack, but Florida would be able to take the lead early in the 4th quarter, and it wasn't looking too good for Florida State. This perfectly thrown pass would be the backbreaker against this defense, as it would set up this easy touchdown, and Florida State would lose the biggest game of the year. The final game of Deion Sanders' football career, he was in the Cheez-It Bowl against Iowa State, a team that they had played in the Cheez-It Bowl a couple of years ago. And of course it was raining in Deion's last game, because when the hell isn't it raining for a Florida State game? Deion didn't want to go out like a sucker, but it didn't help that he would let up this touchdown pass with less than 5 seconds to go in the 2nd quarter. I mean, that's just terrible football, but there's a whole nother half to go, and in the 3rd quarter, Florida State will be able to hold Iowa State to a field goal here, keeping it to a one-possession game. Florida State's offense would need to finally do something that they would convert this 3rd and 2, and on the next 3rd and 7, just a few plays later, they would be able to convert again, this time for a touchdown. Iowa State would get an opportunity, and on 3rd and 6, Deion would finally step up. The next time Iowa State got the ball, it looked like this game was going to be over, because when the quarterback scrambled, he would fumble it, but the Iowa State receiver would recover. The very next play, Iowa State would fumble it again, but the odds weren't in their favor, as Florida State would recover this one. Florida State would settle for a field goal, and it was still a one-possession game, but we would have a storybook ending as Deion Sanders would make the game-winning interception on his final play of his collegiate career. And I appreciate all y'all for sticking around and watching this series. Let me know in the comments who you think I should play as next. I'm thinking as a quarterback, but y'all let me know. And if you got to this point, please subscribe.